Welcome to Week 8, Access Control for Information Systems. So what are we going to be looking at today? Learning objectives: implement appropriate access controls for information systems with information technology and infrastructure. How to protect data. How to protect file systems. How to protect executables. We're going to look at Microsoft Windows, Unix, and how all this stuff comes together. We're going to explain the different types of controls that we have, some key concepts, user account privileges we want to look at, and how all this comes together. So that is what Chapter 8 will be about. So what is access control for data? Major concern for all IT departments is the security and integrity of the data. Let's face it, data is the most important part of any company. It keeps everything. It's what we work for. It's what we build. So we have to protect our data. Basically, there's two states of the data: at rest and in motion. Data at rest is that in a storage system. Data in motion is data that is in transit, such as on a network. To truly protect the data, you need to consider both of these. So data at rest, or DAR, simple stored data. The data may be archival from a tape or an optical disk or a hard drive, or sitting in someone's system's buffer, depending on where the data is resting. It can be very high risk. Some devices, such as a web server, are accessible from outside organizations. Networks are open to attack. Portable devices like personal digital assistants, PDAs, flash drives, laptops might put data at risk. So how do we secure data in motion? Data at rest. Basically, we're going to look at have to restrict access, whether you're going to have different privacy settings on your computers. I know where I work, what we had was before you even got to the Windows screen to log into your laptop, you had to put a password in at the boot screen. So this way someone couldn't even get into that role. So we're going to make sure that access controls are vital when we set it up, have strict accounts, access controls in place to ensure everything is safe. So how are we going to protect it? Depends. We can just, when we're talking about a database, we can put in certain safeguards in the database that only certain files can be seen by certain people. We can also have files on the network or shared drive that are protected. For portable drives, USB, they can be encrypted now, which we've done at some of the companies I've worked at. File shares, personal computers, laptops. This is where all data can be residing, and we need to review everywhere where we can have sensitive data. Where is it? How do we protect it? That's what we're trying to figure out. Data in motion. Let's just going back for a second. That was the other one up here. Data in motion. The term used to describe data that travels from place to place, across websites, servers, and this allows it to be moving, especially through websites. When data is in the motion, it becomes very vulnerable, especially over the internet, as it travels over a network, which networks can be wired or wireless. Wireless ones can be hacked and see data going through it. Wired ones can have special sniffers put on to see data going through it. So you need to make sure that data in transit can kind of be also, we have to take that into account when we're looking at it. So how do we secure data in transit, in motion? We encrypt it. If you ever logged into your website, you pay for something, it gets encrypted. This is especially common with emails encrypted also. The sender and receiver agree on encryption technique, and the data gets encrypted. So these are some of the things we want to think about. Anything that's open. Here's our web server. If we're going over the internet, this is someone working from home or a smartphone, the packet is over the internet is open. So you want to make sure that this becomes encrypted to ensure that anyone who sees it doesn't see what the message is. And that's an important part of what we're looking at. How do we securing data in motion? One way to do this, as we talked about, is encrypting it. Object level of security. Object is an item or a distinct group of information in data storage systems. Group information as an object allows you to manage groups related to it, and it helps with that information. An object is an item or a distinct group of information that is stored somewhere, usually in a relational database. And that can, again, as we talked about, databases can be secure, but it can be grouping information. This allows you to manage that data which going through. Some other areas we want to look at: list of properties. Security identifier identifies what's going on, specific users. An access mask that lists the specific rights granted or denied. Flags that we have this on. Security identity identifier, or SID, identifies who has specific use to that. The access masks list the rights, and flags can have that. Child objects, it allows us to put information in. Here are some of the things that we could be looking at. So access denied denies a SID specific access to an object. Allow access, it allows a SID to have access to it. And a system audit causes the creation of an audit record when the SID performs a specific action. So basically everything is recorded on what's going on. Discretionary access control. Controls access to an object. It handles what access is allowed or denied. When the object is assessed, all of the access ACEs contain can be directly accessed. In general, it is not. ACEs contain more or combined results of that. System access control handles information of assurance. Controls that handles information of assurance aspect of the control. Although the user modifies the SACL, this is generally not done. The SACL is a system-generated list based on auditing rules. It contains the ACE to handle what access needs and access attempts. Internal. So how do we control executables? In addition to applying access control, end users and objects can apply them through the application. This takes two forms: internal of applications or operating systems. You're going to assign applications to its own user ID and directories. From there you can grant the application rights only to the files or directories it needs and run explicitly deny from the rest of the system. This gives you a sandbox to work in. If the application is compromised through an exploited code, the malicious user will only have access to a limited piece of data or an area. This type of is very common on web servers. So if someone hacks into your web server, they have a limited area where they can get it in and do any damage. Certain executables have their own internal access control. Internal access controls are necessary when the application holds sensitive information and we don't want it out. So you can either control it by the application or by the operating system. The application, you put in who can run it, they only have access to it, or you could put it on the operating system side. And only certain people can run it. So there's two ways we can set that up depending on the application. I know where I worked, we had both of them. Some third-party applications required the application could control it. Some required us to have it through the operating system. So what's the difference between Microsoft and Unix? So as we know, Microsoft is a GUI-based application. Point, click. Unix is more command line. Even though you can get some Unix that is GUI, but it basically runs more efficient at the command line. So what do we want to look at? Let's take a look at Microsoft. This is Windows. Windows base has highly granular file-based access control. It can be on the administrator works, the user groups, the applications. So we can access it on different things. If you look up here, this is for everyone. We can have the system. This is the administrator rights and the user's rights. So by clicking on it, you can see this everyone right up here only has access to this. Read executable, list the folder's contents, and read it. They can't modify it. They don't have full control. They can't write. So this is one of the ways that we can control what's happening with that information. So if I clicked on administrator, you'd see he'd have check marks for everything down here. The user, here's the user. Again, he might not have full control. He might only have a check mark here, but it just depends on what it is. So full control is the sum of all the rights. If we have a folder and file transfer, folder execute, ability to navigate the file system and execute a file. We can list or read only, the ability to list the contents. Read attributes, the ability to view the ownership and who can do what. Read extended attributes, the ability to view what's going on. Create and write folders, the ability to create new folders and write to existing folders. Create folders, append folders. These are some of the things we can have. Delete. Sometimes you might not give someone, you can modify something, but they may never be able to delete. What's read permissions, take ownership. These are just some of the things that for Windows 8 that we have. So again, this is giving the permissions to the users. So as you can see, this is everyone. If I wanted everyone to have more rights, all I would do is allow this, and this would give them information that they can have. So if I wanted them to deny full control, by leaving it checked, they don't have access. So you really don't have to use deny too much. But you check off the ones that you want them to have. If I want to activate the user, I'd click on the user, change his rights, and then I hit apply and then OK. This allows me to change the rights on that. The systems administrator, this gets me advanced security settings. Domain administrator is a Windows member of special domain administrators group. Members of this group have full control over all computers and domain, including any file or folder that hasn't been explicitly denied to them. So the administrator has rights to everything. If you look, there's our administrator. They have full control. Allows us to see what's going on. So what is Unix? Unix and Linux are about the same thing. Unix has been around since the 1970s. Linux is a free version of Unix. But by default, Unix-based systems, which include Unix and Linux, has simplified the ACL-based permission system. Unlike the ACL-based rights are not inherited. In Unix, they must be applied to all files and folders. There are 3 rights classes that we can work with. Unix, you can have read, write, and executable. So read provides the information. Read grants the user or group the ability to read a file. If it's not in its directory, the requester may read the list that's in there. Write grants requester or modified. If the right is set in the directory, requester may create, rename, remove any files. Or an execute grants the right to execute a file. If it allows the requester to run a binary or script. So what are full rights? Full rights show up. So here you have read, write, execute. That's what these have. Read, write, execute. So for the user's the first group. So this means this is very user specific. The second group, RWX, that is for the group. And the last one is the world. So that's if I set RWX at this end, then everyone has access to it. So if I had 007, everyone would have, the world would have access to it. It's not what you'd want to do. Usually your users have the most number, has the highest number, and it is a 7. Read is worth 4. Write is worth 2, and 1 is the execute, I'm sorry. So if I set something to 777, that tells me that everyone has full rights to it. If I just want the user to have full rights, notice you have the 7 here, and you have the 7 here. This group, which is the group, so your people, your co-workers will have read, execute, and execute a file or a program. So they can do some kind of maintenance, they can run a file from that directory. So the user creates the file, the owner, the group can read it, and they can execute it. They can't modify because there's nothing here. If you notice, this becomes a 5. The last group, which is the world, all they can do is read it. So that becomes the 4. 7, 5, 4. So for here, this next one, read, write, no one has executable. This group has a 4, which means they can only read. And in this group, the world can't see nothing. So that's how that kind of comes together and how it works. So how do we change it? Well, we use something called change mode, which is right here. So we have my file, which is here. And you can see we have read, write, execute, so that's a 7. We have this, which makes it a 5, and a 1, right? So now, if I want to change if I do change mode 700, if you notice what happens, the user has full rights to it. The group in the world, nothing, it's blank. So 700 blanks everything out. And if I change mode again to my file, if you see here 777, and if you notice now, everyone has full rights to it. So that's how Unix works. It's with their permissions. And you've got to do this at each level. So what are some information systems we need to care about? Access control for information systems are only as good as the policies and procedures they dictate their use. There are a few general best practices that should be used. First one, create a baseline. Build a baseline for the current access levels in the environment. This will help identify holes in the access, identify which users have rights and beyond. Segregate users by rights by their role. Developers do not need access to production databases. Sales executives don't need access to accounting. So only give the groups of people who need access the group. Don't give them extra. Automate user creation. Have a pre-built group for the major roles in the organization. So you're going to have one for accounting, one for sales, one for accounts payable, one for accounts receivable, one for IT. And then what happens, you just add the people in and it will automatically create their accounts, give them the access that they need so you don't have to keep changing it. The access control environment Some situations, such as accessing a VPN, call for two-factor authentication. In this instance, such as accessing the internet site, you can put lighter controls. And how do we decommission data storage devices? When decommissioning storages, which must be included a hard drive, thumb drive, have standard procedures. Data hard drives, every 3 to 5 years we upgrade computers in our office. All those hard drives have information on it. How do we get rid of them? What is our procedure for cleaning these up? How am I going to look at this and say, hey, we got to get rid of these? You can't just give them out to donation areas. People's espionage can happen, so you've got to be aware of what you're doing with decommissioning your information. So what do we look at? The different states of data and how important the data is. We looked at the file system access. We looked at Windows. We also looked at Unix. What type of privilege management has, access controls, best practices, and what is the infrastructure going to look like. These are just some of the things that we looked at. So, that's it. Have a wonderful day. Remember to smile.